Collateral onboarding call. Today we have an exciting one as we're joined by TribeDAO. Joey, Jack, and Brianna are here to share a little bit more detail about their MIP6 application for onboarding Fei, a collateral type to the MakerDAO protocol, which is a stablecoin. If you have any questions for the team throughout their presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And then at the end during our Q&A, also feel free to use the raised hand feature to hop on the mic and ask any questions you have directly. With that, I'm excited to hand the mic over to Joey to go ahead and kick things off.
Yeah, thanks a ton, Retro. It's very exciting to be here. Yeah, I'm a longtime Maker user fan. And yeah, I mean, I think a good place to get started would be to share some context about how TribeDAO kind of came about, and sort of our background as a team. And that can, help kind of give context to Maker as to, who they might be partnering with. And so, yeah, maybe like zooming back out. Yeah, I've been using DeFi since like before DeFi was a word. In the very earliest days, it was literally just MakerDAO compound, pretty much, DYDX, early Dharma. And this was a very cool time in DeFi because, it still was like so early and exciting. And, the first lending markets, the first AMMs, these were like the core primitives that everything we have today were built on. And I thought MakerDAO, and I still do, is like one of the coolest and most essential protocols in DeFi. I was kind of really very interested in like the stablecoin trilemma, the idea that you can't have a stablecoin that's simultaneously decentralized, scalable, and collateralized. And so like thinking about how like centralized stables fit into the paradigm and how DAI fits into the paradigm, and looking at some of the trade-offs that Maker was making, especially now, makes a lot of sense. And when I was thinking about Fei, I was really thinking about where's DeFi going? What's kind of the next sort of iteration of stablecoins, or like what does DeFi need? And the original idea for Fei, the big idea was protocol controlled value. There was actually two ideas in the original Fei concept, and only one of them is still being used. So that was protocol controlled value and direct incentives. So protocol controlled value, very simply, is basically like a protocol managed reserve. And so that reserve can hold other stable coins, it can hold ETH, it can hold any kind of asset or derivative that you want. And we'll go into like Fei's PCV today, later in the presentation. And yeah, that was kind of this idea that if a protocol sovereignly owns assets, as opposed to like users having a direct claim on the asset, like in a Maker vault, for example, where the user is maintaining exposure until they get liquidated, that's a very interesting paradigm for the protocol to be able to operate in, because now they can use that liquidity to provide value to the stablecoin on secondary markets, get integrations and things. So that was really the angle that Fei took. And some of the early ideas weren't good ideas, like direct incentives. And if you go back and look at our history, you can see kind of a lot of the challenges and trade-offs that were made. And I think the protocol has gotten a lot more battle-hardened and refocused because of all these iterations. And more and more, I've come to appreciate sort of MakerDAO's design philosophy and Maker's place in DeFi, because it's very, very hard to make something that's truly stable in a ton of different market conditions. And I think that it's very cool to kind of internalize all of the learnings from these giants in DeFi and try to apply them to to a newer project. And so that's kind of the origin of the Fei stablecoin. And the current version is pretty much just the PCV that's backing Fei, and then the protocol is like shifting that PCV across stablecoins and D3M style deployments, and yeah, just all these other portfolio allocations. There's some automated backstopping like you have with MKR, and yeah, like that's sort of the high level. At the end of last year, there was a merge between Fei and Rari Capital, and this sort of created the Tribe DAO, where previously it was kind of called the Fei DAO, and it was like solely focused on the stablecoin. And now you have Fei Protocol, Rari Capital, which is Fuse, the permissionless lending market. They also have a yield aggregator, and then two more projects, which are earlier stage, Volt, an inflation resistant stablecoin, and Midas Capital, which is like more of a multi-chain focused version of Fuse. And I'm sure we can talk more about the whole Tribe DAO in the presentation, but for now, yeah, I think we can start to get into some of the dirty details on this proposal and why Fei would be an excellent collateral to onboard into Maker. Retro, do you want me to pause there for anything, or should I keep going?
No, you're good to keep going, and if questions pop up, I'll butt in.
Sweet, awesome. Yeah, so I think that a really good place to start is why onboard Fei from a MakerDAO perspective. So one, it would obviously increase the decentralized asset backing for DAI and earn the protocol revenue. The MIP6 application includes a stability fee, and Fei Protocol is a very large on-chain reserve and entity that could provide meaningful cash flow to MakerDAO and sort of move the needle. So I think that that's obviously a really strong value proposition. And then like I know there's been kind of stablecoins are always in the zeitgeist, and partnering with other decentralized stablecoin issuers really, DeFi, it's so clear that DeFi needs conservative decentralized stablecoins that can scale and provide that permissionless base layer for DeFi. DAI is filling a great role there. Fei wants to be a part of that, and I think especially together, Fei and DAI can kind of be sort of leading decentralized stablecoins and adhering to kind of what DeFi needs, right? Which is, a commitment to decentralization, a commitment to permissionlessness, a commitment to conservatism to actually be able to weather, the crazy market volatility and adversarial environment of DeFi and really be like a solid bedrock. And so I think Fei kind of fits a lot of these criteria, and there's a lot of cool ways to collaborate, and we can touch on some of those at the end of the presentation. But and obviously from a Fei perspective, it's important to know kind of how DAI fits into the current Fei protocol. Let me see if I have a slide on this. So DAI is currently one of the assets that backs Fei. We can actually see that here. Currently, the number is lower, and that's because, so you can see it's 5 million out of a total of around 500 million in collateral. The reason it's lower now and how it sort of normally plays in is that DAI plays a similar role to Fei that USDC plays for DAI, which is it's sort of the buffer. There's a peg stability module in Fei protocol that takes in DAI and issues Fei for a very low swap fee. And this is kind of the way that Fei really, really tightened its peg over the last couple of months, because previously the protocol was using oracles of various kinds, Chainlink, TWAPs on UniV3, Balancer, whatever. And these were all good, but the lagging of a TWAP or Chainlink simply could not hold the tight enough peg. It was always off by like 20, 30, 50 basis points. And the only way to really get it to being super, super tight is to peg to something that has the tightest possible arb loop on chain, and that would be DAI or USDC. But as we mentioned, Fei is very committed to decentralization, decentralized collateral as much as possible. And so DAI is kind of a perfect candidate to serve that function inside Fei Protocol. So yeah, and then so because of sort of the recent market downturn, the protocol has had to preferentially sell stablecoins in the short term to defend the peg. But the protocol is Marco, isn't the Fei peg issue less than $1? How does the DAI PSM help here at all? Yeah, so if the protocol has DAI and is willing to sell DAI to buy back Fei, then people can buy Fei under $1 in the market and bring it back. So people can basically arb Fei back to DAI. Like you could buy Fei low, sell it for DAI at $1, and that helps keep the peg. So currently the USDC PSM, because there's such an excess demand for DAI, it's sort of keeping DAI under $1, but it also works in reverse if you kind of run out of, or no, I think it works the same way actually. Yeah, you can arb in both directions, so it kind of keeps the peg on both sides. I hope that answers the question, Marco. Oh, yeah, works until it runs out. Okay, so long for wisdom. This is a great point. The protocol controlled reserves are managed by the Tribe DAO. There's some there's some like algorithmic components, and then obviously some governance components. And these reserves would kind of be converted into each other as needed, with DAI being the primary sort of stability asset in the reserve. So currently there's governance voting to kind of reallocate some of this DPI, Rari, ETH, and LUSD into DAI to defend the peg, and that's actually very actively ongoing right now, which is why the PCB kind of looks the way it does right now. So yeah, like the protocol is sort of intended to be over collateralized. There's no it's theoretically possible to kind of enter short periods of under collateralization, at which point Tribe would be issued to kind of recollateralize the system. And yeah, so the reserves are super important. This is the lifeblood of the protocol. Currently, the collateralization is around 200%, and so yeah, that's sort of like the credit worthiness of the Tribe DAO or the collateral backing Fei. There is no Tribe component in the backing in this model. It's purely external collateral, and it's like very high quality collateral as well. So that's kind of the idea of the Fei PCB, and you're sort of splitting between all these different stable assets and ETH and some DPI and things like that. Sort of meta governance. Tribe DAO has kind of collected a lot of governance tokens throughout the period of like deploying capital to Compound, Aave, and Curve, and whatever. So there's also a pretty strong meta governance component that's not really, this MIS category has kind of a lot of different tokens in there as well. So yeah, that's kind of a high level overview of the protocol controlled value. And this is not just held as sort of native assets, it's actively deployed. So about half of the ETH is staked on Lido, for example. And then, the rest is between Aave, Compound, and Tokamak. The LUSD is primarily in the liquidity stability pool. So that's like, earning additional yield there. The DAI is mostly on Compound, et cetera, et cetera. So the protocol is kind of actively deploying reserves, and that's where the majority of sort of the revenue of the protocol comes from. And that revenue is currently, a couple weeks ago, it was like 30 or 40 mil. With the drawdown on ETH, it's probably a little lower than that. But yeah, that's sort of the annualized revenue of the protocol, which is denominated in both like ETH staking, underlying yield tokens, and stablecoin sort of lending and farming. So yeah, that's sort of the high level breakdown of the sort of the credit worthiness of the Tribe DAO and sort of Fei as a collateral, which is backed by, this sort of diversified treasury, if you will. So yeah, and then kind of diving a little deeper into what we just talked about with Fei's stability. It's pegged to $1. It uses this reserve backing mechanism of protocol controlled value and redeemability through these PSMs. There are PSMs on some of the other assets. There's a PSM on ETH and a PSM on LUSD, where they're pegged to the Oracle reported price from Chainlink. These are usually disabled. They're currently enabled because the DAI reserves are so low, but usually it's just DAI. And then when the protocol is under stress, it kind of starts releasing other assets as well through these PSMs. And yeah, there's been a ton of DAI Fei exchange volume through the PSMs, hundreds of millions. And the protocol has, been sort of deploying DAI throughout the ecosystem to compound MakerDAO, et cetera. Or not to MakerDAO, to compound Fuse, Aave. And hopefully now we could use DAI on MakerDAO too. At what point do other PSMs work? Any capital controls? Yeah, Primoz, great question. So the PSMs, they're basically toggled by there's sort of two triggers. It's sort of governance and how much DAI there is in the protocol. So if DAI is at a surplus, then the DAI PSM would be redeem only. And then you could only redeem Fei for like ETH or LUSD or whatever. There's sort of some sort of simple criteria for how you can get from just DAI to LUSD or ETH. And then as the DAI reserves start to deplete, then the protocol would say like not be minting ETH and instead be minting for DAI to kind of replenish those reserves. There's no dashboard on the stats for the PSM. This is something that we're working on. Right now, the PSMs are mostly used by arbitrageurs, so there hasn't really been a ton of data. I think there's a Dune dashboard from Llama protocol that is very awesome and has a lot of data on it. Let me see, maybe let me drop the link here. I think this has some PSM data as well. Yeah, Bree, what was that?
I put the link in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of the stability, redeemability kind of mechanism. And then lastly, just kind of reviewing the MIP6 terms. Let me go back to slides. So yeah, the idea would be 150% collateralization ratio. And I think the original application was for a Fei PSM on MakerDAO. And for various reasons discussed on the forum, it seems like there's a lot more agreement around sort of having an additional buffer of collateral, even though Fei is a stable asset. The idea being that MakerDAO is kind of a senior tranche where they have sort of an excess claim on PCV in the event that anything was going to go wrong. And so having that extra collateralization protects MakerDAO. It isn't necessarily more expensive to the Tribe DAO because the Tribe DAO is a token issuer of Fei. So it kind of works very well sort of on both sides. And the stability fee would be 2%, which at 100 million of DAI utilization, this would increase the MakerDAO reserve revenue by 2.5%, which I think is pretty awesome to see in a single collateral. And as I mentioned before, Fei Protocol is earning sort of tens of millions of dollars a year. It can easily cover the stability fee on 100 million DAI. And so I think it's a huge win-win, and something that we hope the maker community really seriously considers. And I think the Tribe DAO is sort of prepared to use roughly 2/3 of this 150 million DAI cap that was proposed on the collateral onboarding. So that would be used kind of immediately, and to basically help defend the peg in the current sort of contractionary cycle, and be deployed into some of these various protocol strategies to help increase the yield as well. And that's sort of the intended use case for this DAI. So happy to take some questions now. I also have one more slide after this, kind of on like some forward-looking partnership opportunities, but I do want to make sure to carve out some space to discuss sort of any questions about the terms or about Fei as sort of a collateral or protocol or anyone involved. So feel free to fire away anybody if you have anything. And there was already some great questions asked.
Hey, Joey, Retro here. Quick question. You brought up the initial proposal that I believe was posted in September for the PSM. And in that, you also mentioned that Fei V2 would be rolled out in that timeframe, which would introduce better mechanics to managing the protocol. Can you talk about that V2 upgrade at all in terms of how it should support the onboarding?
Yeah, so the kind of what I discussed is basically the V2. It's sort of going all in on protocol controlled value, and then as I mentioned before, Tribe is sort of absorbing the volatility in the reserve. So if the protocol does ever go under 100% collateralized, which as I mentioned, it's currently around 200% to the outstanding Fei, then Tribe would be issued to kind of recover. And at the same time, the protocol would be, kind of buying back Tribe on the market with surplus. And that's a very conservative sort of buyback. We've seen a lot of the discussions in MakerDAO surrounding buybacks and how effective they are. So currently they're actually turned off, but the protocol could vote to have buybacks be any percentage of the surplus over the outstanding Fei. And like historically, that's been anywhere between like 5 and 20%, and now it's 0. But yeah, so it's the protocol managed reserves with direct redeemability against the reserves as the stability mechanism, as I mentioned sort of on this slide, and then Tribe kind of defending that and protecting that as sort of the buffer, similar to how MKR works in the maker system. So it's a much more kind of just like conservative, it works, it keeps it stable, rather than introducing like any crazy algorithmic mechanisms. There was one piece of Fei V2 called the risk curves, which is like sort of a more automated way of rebalancing PCV. As the R&D got like much more in depth and sort of the trade-off spaces were sort of surfaced more, it was the community kind of decided to go more on the route of keeping it simple and using kind of the if the protocol is like has this DAI buffer, that's enough, and then it would start preferentially accumulating more volatile assets if the collateralization is healthy enough. Otherwise, it would be refilling the DAI buffer. So it's more based on the redemption rather than like actively rebalancing, and then governance would be sort of voting to rebalance as needed, as it's doing currently with the sort of current market conditions.
Got it. Appreciate that context. Just as a quick reminder, now would be the perfect opportunity to use the raise hand feature if you'd like to come up on stage and ask a more in-depth question. Otherwise, it does look like we have another one from Long for Wisdom asking, at what point do you bail on the Volatile PCV in a black swan event. Like Maker maintains the over collateralization by liquidating users below that ratio. How does Fei maintain the over collateralization in the situation in that situation, or would it allow Fei to become under collateralized?
Yeah, so I don't think governance would, governance wouldn't allow Fei to become, allow is a strong word, but it's like governance would do what it could to prevent Fei from becoming under collateralized, because if it was under collateralized, that means that there needs to be a tribe issuance to sort of recover that. So right now, people are starting to kind of call for some rebalancing out of ETH, for example. And so the protocol is sort of, like basically trying to maintain this sort of healthy collateralization ratio. It's currently 200%. That's like still very good, even in the current market conditions. But once that number starts to get into the like high 100s, people are starting to, call for more rebalancing into stable assets, and that's kind of the trade-off space. So it's sort of like a self-liquidation, if you will.
Okay. If you want to hop to the last slide, maybe that'll give a little bit more time for questions to roll in.
Yeah, absolutely. So last slide, looking into the future. Obviously, the Tribe DAO, as I mentioned, is kind of a bigger entity than just Fei, the stablecoin. And so, there's a couple of cool ways for MakerDAO to either plug into that or sort of use some of the newer mechanisms that have been developed by the Tribe DAO. So what's the intended use case for the 100 million facility again? Okay, so Primoz asked, what's the intended use case for this 100 million Fei? So as I kind of mentioned, the protocol is sort of low on buy reserves, which are usually used to defend the peg in the PSM, and especially in the current market environment, there's a lot of sort of Fei that's being redeemed for underlying reserves, and so I expect that like a good portion of that DAI would be redeemed, and this could be a way that the protocol could, for example, unwind its incentive program. Right now, there's a tribe liquidity mining program that's sort of artificially, it's providing a ton of value to the protocol, right? You're getting all this secondary market liquidity, and some of that is being recaptured through, to be very specific, some of the yield farming where Tribe is being sort of issued to liquidity providers is going to the Fuse Pool 8. Maybe I could actually pull up the pool. Anyway, so the Tribe DAO is sort of paying Tribe to have people staking their liquidity pool tokens on Curve, and then the Tribe DAO is keeping the Curve and convex yield that's being generated from that. But to answer your question, like that, like liquidity mining is sort of known to be a relatively expensive operation, and I think a lot of protocols right now are kind of tightening up and preparing for, surviving whatever is going to happen over the next year or so. And one of those things could be turning off incentives, and that would create more sort of redemption pressure on the Fei peg, in which case a line of credit from MakerDAO using this 100 million facility would be a much cheaper alternative than sort of issuing 10-15% APR in Tribe to sort of have all that Fei in circulation. So it's really kind of a way to help get back to the core set of profitable kind of yield arbitrage and ETH staking and things, rather than having this like huge cost on the Fei protocol balance sheet, which is the liquidity mining. So the DAI would help a lot with that. And then any additional DAI will be sort of deployed to Fuse and or Compound and or any other deployment strategy. I think one actually really important deployment strategy that I didn't mention is that the Tribe DAO is very close with the Balancer DAO and does a lot of sort of liquidity and rebalancing through Balancer. And there's one pool that we've been trying to push, which is called Balancer Boosted FUSD. So it's DAI, Fei, and LUSD in the 3 pool on Balancer. And this is something that I think is sort of in the spirit of DeFi, right? It's 3 very decentralized stable coins that have a good amount of Lindy and sort of a strong value proposition. And so creating kind of a 3 pool around these tokens would be a good way to be an alternative to like 3 CRV and the 3 CRV equivalent in the Balancer ecosystem. So we would be using the DAI for that as well. So there's kind of a couple like core use cases, and then having the additional 50 million or whatever in the event of sort of further need for it. That would be kind of the idea there. So I think that it makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that was a good answer to your question.
And it does look like we have another question queued up by El Pro. He asks, can you please provide more color on how Fei is adopting ERC 4626 and what benefits can it provide to a possible partnership with MakerDAO? He may have missed it, but in your last audit of July 21st, the last audit was July 21st. Are you slated to have a new audit in 2022?
Yeah, so there's actually been like quite a few audits for all of the different kind of feature rollouts for Fei. The Fei protocol as it stands has been like relatively the core infrastructure has been relatively the same. There hasn't really been any changes. So there hasn't been any new audits to like the core Fei protocol. But there have been some new products like Turbo, which uses ERC 4626 extensively. And that was like well audited. It was audited by Consensus Diligence. It did a Code Arena audit. We sent it to every security researcher that we knew. And I'm really excited about that code. So maybe that kind of ties into this 4626 question, which is from El Pro. How is Fei adopting 4626 and what benefits can it provide to a partnership with MakerDAO? So one, I think it would be very awesome if MakerDAO created an adapter for 4626 collateral types, so that it would be very easy from a technical perspective to onboard new collaterals that use the standard. We've seen a ton, like way more adoption than I was expecting. I think people really kind of got the idea for 4626. So for those of you who aren't familiar, if you think about what's common across Compound, Aave, the DAI savings rate, Yearn, it's like you're deploying a single token to a strategy and then possibly earning some yield on that token. And ERC 4626 is a standardization of the interface for that sort of paradigm. It's a single token strategy standard. And most of DeFi looks like this. So 4626 has a ton of applications in it. It's really powerful for, there's kind of 2 consumers of the standard. There's implementers like Aave and Compound who would just be using it. And the reason that there wasn't a standard before is because there isn't really a huge incentive for implementers to actually, implement a common standard, because they're just like, we don't care about being compatible with anything. There is no standard. We're just going to write code that works for us. But then when you think about the integrators, sort of the Yearns of the world, Fuse is an integrator because Rari Capital Fuse has a plugin module where unlent reserves can be deployed to another strategy. Balancer is an integrator, and MakerDAO would be an integrator because you're taking in these like new collateral types, which might be yield strategies. And it makes it way easier because now you don't have to write adapters, where adapters require new audits, dev time. They're very prone to error. And so the Tribe DAO is trying to use 4626 for everything. And in particular, Turbo is kind of the a product that's like through and through built with 4626. So maybe I can explain Turbo a little bit, and hopefully that will illustrate some of the future partnership opportunities. So the way Turbo works is it basically takes the idea that MakerDAO has of issuing a stablecoin against collateral, but it separates the issuer from the borrower. So in the MakerDAO system, if you're going to issue DAI, there's always a non-zero stability fee. And I don't think that's like, it has to be that way, but that's just the way that Maker is currently programmed. It's always a non-zero stability fee for whatever collateral type you use. You're always paying 50 basis points, 2%, 3%, 4% to generate that DAI. But the way that Turbo kind of flips that is it lets issuers issue DAI into approved yield strategies. So think of it like it's like a D3M as a service, basically, where Maker doesn't want to be actively rebalancing between Aave and Compound and whatever D3Ms that are active. Instead, users would be kind of yield maximizing their DAI by boosting it into these different strategies. And then MakerDAO can take like a generous revenue cut of this D3M. So for example, right now, the default rate for Turbo and Fei is 80% of the yield goes to the Tribe DAO and only 20% goes to the holder. But what's cool about that is that it's a risk-free interest rate arbitrage for the Turbo user. Not risk-free because they're still putting up collateral, so they're still subject to liquidation, but they aren't worried about rebalancing the loan because there is no origination fee. It's 0% to kind of boost it into the yield strategy. And then whatever yield is earned, so say on Aave, it's like 2%, then MakerDAO, or in this case, the Tribe DAO would make 1.6%, and then the user would make 40 basis points, which is just pure profit for them. And it's good for MakerDAO because you have this extra layer of collateralization. I think it was Monet Supply who mentioned that this is a really good mechanism for if Maker doesn't want to be actively underwriting all of these strategies, they just want to underwrite the collaterals. And that's what Turbo's great for. It adds an extra layer of protection to this DAI that's being issued, but it also creates this nice sort of incentive alignment with users for users are going to go find this yield. It's sort of a pure profit. The only cost is the opportunity cost of capital. And then MakerDAO is protected by having a closed set of known collateral types that's sort of already approved by the risk model that Maker uses. So this is similar to the LP tokens in Maker. It's similar, but I would say that LP tokens are still kind of manually, they're sort of manually approved strategies versus with Turbo, you could even have a strategy like all fuse pools that meet these criteria are automatically approved. And you can kind of automate some of the approval and you can be a little bit more risk on with what yield strategies are approved, assuming you keep a tight control on the collaterals. So what's really cool about Turbo is there's two ways to do it as a DAO that's kind of supporting Turbo. You can have risky collateral types paired with very conservative yield strategies, or you can have the reverse, where you have sort of a conservative set of collateral types and a bunch of like more risk on yield strategies that you couldn't normally issue directly into for fear of, or because it's not like the risk adjusted yield is not good enough. So it's not totally like just like using LP tokens as collateral, but in theory, you could use the yield strategy itself as collateral. I guess that is, in some sense, that's like one of the use cases. Yeah. And then I think I missed one more question from Marco. So do I have any comment on why price is still less than 1, even though you can achieve 15% APR? Yeah, so I think Marco, why Fei is still under 1, DAI was it was a different time when DAI was sort of trading way over $1 due to high farming incentives and things. These were like, DeFi was much younger, and I think people were a lot more excited by like all the different yield opportunities. DAI was sort of far and away the only choice for these sort of external yield opportunities, and there was just so much demand for DAI. I think for stable coins in the current environment, it's more competitive. Fei is a little bit like cyclical with the market. So because it's paired with ETH and other volatile assets, a lot of times when the market's going down, there's downward peg pressure that's put on Fei, because the primary liquidity pairs for Fei, other than stable pairs, are ETH and Tribe. And there's quite a large amount of ETH and Tribe that's paired with Fei. So as those tokens go down in value, Fei is entering circulation and probably getting redeemed. So there's a couple reasons why Fei is under $1 right now. And that's one, like, one way to get back to $1 is to just sell a whole bunch of ETH. Probably a cheaper way and a more long-term oriented way could be using sort of the Maker Fei vault to get the DAI in the short term to bring it back to peg. It's sort of a function of yeah, Fei trades within 50 basis points just based on redeemability against whatever assets it has, but it takes DAI specifically to get it within like 5 basis points or within 1 basis point, which is one of the main use cases for the DAI vault that we mentioned. So the answer being there is an excess demand right now. Fei is kind of more correlated to the market rather than DAI, which I think is anti-correlated, where the market's going down, people are kind of closing leverage, buying DAI. Fei is the opposite because it's a protocol. It's a protocol on reserve.
It looks like we do have another question from Long asking what makes the vault better than just selling volatile PCV for DAI?
Yeah, so the vault kind of gives the protocol extra options rather than having to market sell tens or hundreds of millions worth of ETH. It gives the protocol the ability to basically like stay long ETH in the short term. If because the protocol is still 200% collateralized, there's kind of multiple sides to the argument on whether to stay long ETH or start selling some. And I do think that the protocol is going to be, people are actively discussing whether to start rebalancing now. But in either case, a DAI line of credit would be useful for being able to kind of quickly get DAI for some short-term opportunities like this balancer boosted pool that I mentioned, or if it's possible for the protocol to earn more than 2% on DAI, then this is kind of a cool interest rate arbitrage to increase protocol cash flow. So it's not just about selling volatile PCV for DAI. There's a lot of different use cases for the DAI line of credit, and yeah, like that would be kind of some of the trade-offs there.
Awesome. Appreciate the questions from the community. As we're nearing the top of the hour, just want to make sure that any other questions are answered. While we're waiting for those to trickle in, always like to ask, what's the best way to get a hold of you, Joey, and supporting team members here to continue the conversation if there's any other questions?
Yeah, of course. I can drop my Discord in the chat. That's a good way to get in contact with us. Also, you can DM any of us on Twitter. I think those would be the best ways.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to collect those and post them in the forum post as a follow-up. If there are no other questions from the community, I think we're just about ready to wrap it up then, unless Joey, you had anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I guess I would say that, yeah, like there's a lot that Fei and Maker can do together. I think Fei is very in the spirit of MakerDAO, and I think this is a really kind of low risk way for Maker to increase yield, onboard more like sort of long-term oriented DAOs. And yeah, we're really excited to have the opportunity to chat to everybody. There's a ton of great questions today, and just thanks a ton for the time and the community's consideration here.
Yeah, and likewise, thank you guys for making time in your schedule to speak with the community here. I just dropped the link for Fei's MIP6 collateral application in the chat. This video will be posted on the call announcement link in case anyone would like to follow up. And as always, the conversation is always ongoing at forum.makerdao.com. So would like to thank everybody for joining, and we'll see you around the forums. Thanks, everyone.